There we go.
Done.
We are live.
I feel like you should introduce it today.
No, you can.
No?
You've got it nailed.
So
I'll take a coin if you want. I'll go and get a coin. if it's that tricky a situation, I don't want any kind of clouds hanging over this, you know.
So tonight's Q&A with our special guest that we'll introduce to you very shortly is brought to you by the Sports Barista,
Coffee to Conquer, and Precision Hydration.
the Sweat Experts. So our guest doesn't really need much of an introduction. He's pretty well known in the triathlon world. It's, of course, top UK worldwide coach Joe Bear. Joe, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is a great way of getting out there, and really looking forward to the questions. Were great. So I'm really ready for it.
Cool. So we're going to talk to Joe about power.
Yep.
He's just put out an article last week all about power, an introduction to power, basically.
Yeah.
So we've got a few questions from members about power.
Yeah.
We've also got some questions about sports nutrition, particularly with race day and the week building up to it. Yeah. Now, it's quite a common theme. So a lot of the people that we get on, people want to know about what do you have on race day, you know. So who better to ask than someone that's been in the game a long time? Obviously, a lot of experience.
You make me sound old when you say that. I guess I am old.
A veteran of the sport, you know, lots of years, lots of experience, you know, still hard at it. So, Joe, talk to us about, you know, you as an athlete and you as a coach.
Oh, right. Okay. Me as an athlete just started as a cross-country runner at school. That kind of, you know, was alongside, you know, football, rugby, things like that. I think I first started running. I found a training diary the other day from 1985, and it was one out of a magazine, and it was like a little fold-out diary. Coming up sometime in September is the sort of anniversary of that diary. So I don't know how old that makes the running diary, but it's quite an old thing. And you know, 10Ks led to half marathons. I never did a marathon on its own. Only when I evolved up to Ironman I did a marathon. It was just one of those things. It didn't really interest me just to run a marathon. So yeah, I kind of went through this sort of evolution of different sports, and I like doing duathlon. I'm probably better at shorter and sharper than I was longer, but kind of used, you know, nutrition and things to go long distance. Meanwhile, I started at what is now University of Chichester doing a sports science degree. And that kind of added in things that at the time were, you know, cutting edge, like glucose polymers and training to power. I even just found, just before this, my max power data way back when. So it's kind of, you know, all of this stuff's been around, but it's just, I think now so many more people are engaging in triathlon, in realizing that it isn't just who can push harder and who's got you know, more kind of like brain cells to damage in a race. It's much more about applying yourself, you know, because you can't just hit your head against a wall. Let's be honest, you've got to apply yourself. And I've always thought, I'm not a super talented athlete by any means, but I've always thought that actually I can outthink people. When I look back at pictures of aerodynamics, even though it was pretty rough and ready, I was doing stuff with like camelbacks over your back, even in a like duathlon, to make sure I didn't have to take my hands off the bars. And all this was sometimes dead end, sometimes it was using science, sometimes it was using friends of friends who had, you know, a certain amount of knowledge to pass it on. And I've always thought that that's the best way. I didn't really set out to be a coach. I just did sports science, then was asked by 220 to utilize my degree to make an article. And then I started to realize, actually, there's this kind of gap whereby there's all this research that you can look at, and most people would just be dumbfounded just to look at the abstract and go, well, what does that mean? Take that, turn it into an article that practically helps people, and just keep doing that. So 220 then became Cycling Plus, and triathlete in the UK, triathlete in a few times in America as well. I coached in America full time for a year in the early 90s, and that again opened up doors that just meant that when I came back here late 90s, I was so motivated and so could see where the sport was going that it was just a case of, you know, getting yourself a computer, getting yourself an email address that people said, why do you want an email address? And then starting to get out there to people that weren't just in my vicinity, start to, you know, throw out emails to people all over the planet. And so it goes on, and it's never been planned. Still don't know where you're going with it. And that's my kind of thing, that I just think, we've evolved this year just through the COVID situation, that we've kind of had to adapt, doing Zwift sessions with people that are, 300 miles away, and doing things that help people to motivate themselves when they haven't got any events. So yeah, I love technology. I love science. I love being able to, run, bike, swim. And it would be probably bike first, then run, and last swim in terms of what my real passions are. But if I have to, I put my mind to it and I do it. But I'm not one of these people that says, oh, I always do swim, bike and run. No, I don't. I just like what I do, and then sometimes get an event. And I think as you get older in the sport, you start to realize that some of your best performances in certain things have gone. You cannot run like you did. I think is a very difficult thing to balance that. I mean, a lot of people would pretend they could, and then they look at their times and go, no, I can't. And I actually found a training diary from some point in the, I guess it was early 90s, and it was in Lanzarote, it was at Club de Santo, there's all these training sessions, and then there was a 16-minute 5K on the track, and it was like, I was like, I can't even remember that I did that. And it was like, started too fast, slowed down to 75s or whatever, and ran a 16. I thought, oh my God, I didn't even know I'd done it. So some of it's been about setting certain targets. Other bits have been about trying things and seeing whether they work, and then passing that experience on. But it's never been about, I knew I could never be a professional athlete, but that doesn't mean I can't help even professional athletes. I've worked with Scott Yedley, and way back with Matt Balefield, a chap who set the British record back in the 90s called Alan Ingerfield, and so the list goes on. And that's kind of like, I think they're amazing athletes, but that's what they are, athletes. But to help them, because they don't read the journals, they don't understand the science. And so here I am, kind of still running, biking, swimming, in a situation where I guess sometimes I know the answer before I've even thought about it, because it just comes through experience. And sometimes it's intuition, and sometimes it's like, do you know what? I've never come across that before. Let me see what we can do with it. And hence the power stuff. Most of it is like, yep, I've done that before. Most of the nutrition, we had the fads that come and go, but there's some pretty rock solid things I think we can guarantee. But there'll always be something that comes along that, there's a new hype or craze, and it probably is integrated into the model, but only at a periphery. It doesn't turn it all upside down. The HIIT training that comes into gyms is not going to train every triathlete to think they've got to, do loads and loads of HIIT training and change the priority of the sessions. So that's me. And I'm really, really thankful for the opportunity to answer people's questions.
Yeah, it's cool. Should we get
have
into
you
it?
on? Yeah,
absolutely. I'm looking forward to this, definitely.
So straight into
no pressure. Go on.
No pressure. So training questions first. So yes. Are power training zones a better way to train than by pace or by heart rate zones?
Yeah, and I thought about that, and the first thing that came to mind was that there's a relationship between power and heart rate. So if you do a gradual step test, and you referred to earlier like an article that was in Try 247. Yeah, the power one.
Yeah.
Well, there's some ramp test data there of, if you do a certain number of watts, your heart rate goes up. Do another set of watts, heart rate goes up. Yeah. So watts and heart rate have got a relationship between one another. Okay. When we look at pace, it's really difficult to know, pace where. Is it your pace on the flat in an aero position on a bike? Is it your pace uphill? So pace is really difficult. I know people love to say, I want to do the bike in such and such miles an hour.
Yeah.
Or I think I can run such and such. Well, in a sense, that still doesn't really mean that you've got to train at that level constantly. And the unilateral global rule about training is you've got to spend at least 80, maybe as much as 90% of your training below 80% of heart rate max. So you could close your mouth and nose breathe. It's that easy. Not, I've got to put loads of hard sessions. Every session I've got to finish with some efforts. There can't be an easy session where you go, well, that was okay, I'm fine. I only got back about 25 minutes ago, just did 45 minutes run, just steady, jogging along. I shouldn't get back and think, oh, crikey, I've gone so hard. Am I going to be Compass Mentis to talk to you guys? Yet, how many people do we know that always have to put those efforts in? Yeah. So power's good. If you can afford it, absolutely power. And now it's evolved into the stride system for the running shoe. That's great. It surprises you how much power you produce, and you think you're only plodding. And you look at the numbers, you think, wow, that's really, that's quite a solid number, but we know that running is harder work. So it makes sense, but it gives you a better idea, I think, of pace than if you say, oh, I've got to run at 6 minutes per kilometre. Well, is that uphill? Is it on the flat? Is it into the wind? That pace doesn't work. I mean, ultimately, you come out with a pace, but that pace can't be, I'm going to do my sprint try at this pace, and this pace, because some paces are outside of people's ability. Maybe that's not a popular thing to say, but we can't all say the difference between most runners and you and I as to why we can't break the 2-hour marathon is we just haven't really been bothered to run fast enough. And somebody's realized how you do it is you run at 13 miles an hour. It's like, no, you jump on the treadmill that they've got at these expos and try and hold that. And you realize there's only so many people that can do that. So I think pace, particularly when people always put in their diaries about, I held average speed X. It's like, that's okay as a reference point to look back at later, but I would get people to look back at it later and say, okay, you're still in zone 1 now. If we look back 6 months, are you training at a quicker pace, but you're not forcing the heart rate up? So heart rate always tells us how fast the engine's working. Power is a good way of just making sure that before heart rate starts to go up, or before you start to find that you've actually started too quick, power gives us a much better level. But I think as people become receptive to what pace that actually means, they shouldn't have power every time they go out and do a session. They shouldn't sit on their bike and have to do a set power. I'm much more, the heart rate is what we've got to do. Anything from 60 to 80% of heart rate max, you've got to be in that zone. And your power will always be somewhere. There is a relationship between that. That will be something between 40 and approximately 60% of your peak power on a max test. So we know there's a relationship between the two. But I think people like pace because they've kind of got this idea that if they train at that pace, they'll be able to race at that pace, as opposed to if you put a set amount of effort in, which is proportional to the distance across the race, you will come out with X. And X on the bike relates to the temperature, the wind speed, the rolling resistance, how good you are holding your position, etc., etc. It's not, I've got to do 20 miles an hour, because that could be nigh on impossible into a headwind. That means that you blow your legs up for the run. So I think ultimately heart rate is the easiest entry point for people. But once you learn how to do that, you can utilize power. And power is a great way to look at, if you like, benchmarks. And on one of the questions that's to come, I've just worked out, I had a PDF and I've tweaked it and I'll send it to you guys to use, but it's this stage of how somebody with power can kind of, do a max test, do some time trials, do some bits and pieces. And there's a relationship there that they can say, if I do that in a time trial, my Ironman pace is X, because they relate to one another. There's no sort of, excuse me, but this little dog will not let me speak.
That's all right. Well, we did
Muffin. Say hello, Muffin.
We did one yesterday with Mike James and our youngest Remy just barged through the door, squeaky door, just barged in, barging out, crying. I was a nightmare, wasn't it? So it's good. Yeah. But it's his name Muffin.
Muffin.
He's very cool.
Yeah, it's a jug, so it's a Jack Russell and a pug.
He's very cute. He's super cute. Sorry, I'm getting breathing. She. Very pretty.
So there's a relationship. If you get on a rowing machine and you row at a set power that's probably similar to like a bike power, you'll say, that's even with pretty good technique, as long as you're not inefficient. You look at your rowing power and it won't be that far off the heart rate you do on a bike, because there's ultimately, power is just a level of oxygen consumption. You take watts, times it by 4, you'll get approximately the calorie expenditure. So if you do 200 watts, that's about 800 calories an hour. Okay. If you divide that 800 by 5, you get it back into litres of oxygen. And I can't do 800 divided by 5 in my head right now, but whatever.
Don't look at me, I haven't got my calculator.
Lauren's an accountant. She should be able to do these things.
Don't have my calculator.
No, but whatever that is, let's say that's something like 160. Well, that's 160 litres of oxygen that person uses in that sort of hour. Divide it by 60, you can then work out their litres of oxygen per minute. But we don't really go now for doing things based on what's your VO2 max. It's more important. Okay, what's your power? What's your top of zone 1? Are you 80% of max? Because your VO2 max is not really something you can use in the real world. It's just that number that people have a guess at what that number is. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question, because I think people may sort of think that pace is what they're ultimately trying to aim for, but really the pace can vary. Nobody knows exactly what they're going to do on race day. You've just got to deliver what is the most appropriate swim, bike, run effort, which clearly if you get the bike wrong, you don't do a good run. Nobody can come back from a bike ride that's gone too hard because they've got the pace wrong. And I think maybe using power and definitely using heart rate gives you an idea of the proprioception of how easy is and how hard work is, not just, oh, I need to train at such and such a speed. And my biggest I would say challenge with some athletes is to get them to slow down enough. And they'll always be out at the top of zone 1, and they're sort of like, it doesn't feel too hard. It's like, no, but it's too hard physiologically. You're creating too much lactate. You are creating a stress. Keep it below 80%. It'll be a training session. Go above 80%, it's technically a race. So, I think you've got to find a metric that works for you, but it would never be pace.
So Joe, I'm gonna push you for so if you're trapped in the corner and you've only got one of those metrics to train your athletes from now on, which one would you pick?
Heart rate. Yeah, cool. It's just much more mobile, more mobile, cool. And it's it's easily, you can do it manually on your on your neck. And I think people understand heart rate better. I'm not going to say people can't eventually understand how power works, but I think heart rate can be affected by, the humidity, heat buildup, even nerves. So, none of it is pure. You've still got to be able to interpret it. So somebody that can get their power to a certain level, but the heart rate just seems really sluggish and they seem tired, they're not fit, they're tired. The heart rate just really doesn't want to climb. Somebody that's rested for a few days does the same heart rate sort of increase, and the power seems to be okay, but the heart rate seems to be rushing away. So it's how somebody interprets those numbers. But if you only have one tool, it'd definitely be heart rate.
I've just thought of another question, but I'll park it for the end because
I'll keep
it. But it's a good one. I might write it down actually.
So it leads on quite nicely. So do you think a beginner would benefit from a power meter as much as an elite or pro athlete would?
Yeah, I think they would, and they may not need access to one permanently. So it's not like, right, everybody, you've got to shell out, your 600, 800,000 pounds, and they're a beginner into the sport. And there are beginners that throw more than that at their bike, let's be honest. So it's not like it's the most expensive part of the triathlon toolkit. But I think being realistic, because somebody gives you the right numbers, is a great start for a beginner to find out what their power data is. And the number one metric, you see it in research, you see it in pictures of pro teams when they have their board of athletes and so forth, is this progressive ramp test where you start at maybe 80 to 100 watts depending on the individual, and you just go up 20 watts every minute and just keep going up and up and up and up, and eventually you're shoving a gear that something goes wrong. It's your breathing, it's your head. People have sort of sometimes said, I might have been able to do a bit more, but they don't come back and repeat it and add another 50 watts on. They just don't. Of course, unlike a hill, you don't want to change gear either, because it's not going to ever get easier. Whereas a hill, you can change gear and get easier. And like I said, I found some max test data. And over that entire period, I've never beaten, but always got really close to this window of where my numbers are. It's like a 20-watt window that I can say that, I can get to there, but I've never gone over that number. And that's just the limit of my engine. And that's over, lots of different types of training, lots of decades even. It's still there. That's why they talent spot people by doing a ramp test. Or max test, rather. I've got a defined ramp test in a minute. But, you do a max test, and then somebody says, we need you on our bike team because you've got the minerals and we've just tested it and we know that. Whereas if somebody's got lower wattage, that's okay. That's not a problem, but it's then using those numbers. And for the beginner, that can mean that they have an idea of, if they're coming in at a half Ironman point and they just want to get round, you can give them a much better target as to what they should expect to do, as opposed to, kind of spending it on other things that put pressure on them to go faster. This is a way of keeping them pacing the correct race, but also you can fitness test. Instead of doing a max test, you can do blocks of 100, 125, 150, maybe 175. What's your heart rate at the end of each 3 minutes? That tells you how fit you are. When you're getting fitter, those heart rates are dropping. Bingo, you're getting more efficient. Again, that will eventually bottom out sometime in the summer, and it will get worse as we go into the winter because of the effect of not temperature, but daylight length, not even volume, because some people train more in the winter, though it's not the best thing because the return on investment is pretty poor. But we do get this point where, you know, most world records are in a certain window in the Northern Hemisphere because of that effect. And therefore, if you fitness test yourself, you don't need to go to a lab. You can see that at your 175 watts, you've got some of the best numbers ever, and here comes a race, and you know why, because you've done the best training. So it's kind of chicken and egg, but absolutely for a beginner, if they get their own power meter, or if they use a watt bike at the gym just to get a sensation of what power feels like, so they know what, you get somebody to say, right, sit there and just pedal at 150 watts. And how skilled they are depends on how much that goes up and down. You don't want it to sound this really erratic pedal stroke. It should sound, smooth as a knife through butter. It should be really pure. And you see that in testing people. You can tell who's sat on a power meter and who hasn't, because some people are all over the shop, and other people, you ask for a number and they can deliver it plus or minus probably. It's still probably plus or minus 8 or so, but it's still better than the person that's literally going 20 watts either side of that number, which shows that they can't neuromuscularly challenge themselves at the right level. You're not asking go as hard as possible. You're saying, right, do a steady state ride. And I think that for a beginner is a great way, when cycling may not be a skill that they've necessarily done as a child or as a sort of young adult, in which case you can learn how to be more efficient. Okay.
And in terms of the power data, what is kind of the important bit, and how do you use that when you're training and racing? So
the number one thing would be that max test. So it would be that going up to max, which, is pretty unpleasant. And people, people sort of think that they're not trained for it. Well, nobody trains for it, because you can't get that much better at doing it. You might be able to, fire yourself up to push another 5 or possibly 10 watts, but it doesn't keep going. The reason why some people are really strong on bikes automatically is not that they're trying harder than the next person when it comes to a max test. It's that they've just got whatever it is within the, the cycling musculature, particularly the quads. Maybe there's a prior sports history. They were a rugby player, they had strong legs, they're good on a bike. Yeah, but they had strong legs anyway. They didn't decide they were going to be strong on a bike. They had the strong legs and then got on a bike. So that's why they take, 16, 17, 18-year-olds, they max test them, and then they say, right, you've got a contract with us. If they've got a 460, 480 max, they'll be solid, but they won't go Pro Tour. If they've got 500, 530, they'll be Pro Tour material, and they'll go, right, you've just got what nobody can make up for having 50, 60 watts less. They might be a domestique, but you can measure that. And I remember doing max tests, and as much as you tried to push them really hard in a lab, you were just proving that everybody had this limit. And it's only when you see other people's limits you think, well, actually, it doesn't matter whether somebody's got more watts. It's how you use that. Yeah. So although max is definitely one of the most important numbers, because you take that, times it by 0.55, there's your Ironman power. Okay, that is your Ironman power. It can be a bit higher for elites because they've got slightly less time on the bike, and they've also got a huge muscular kind of strength endurance aspect that means that they don't fatigue quite so much with a few more percent. But they still talk about their power window that they've got, and if they go too hard, they won't run the run, and it's as simple as that. So that max number allows you to pace your Ironmans, do your club time trials faster, and even pace shorter distant races to know where your window of opportunity is. And so although it's uncomfortable, although people want to repeat it, it's a useful number. And then you use other things like the progressive ramp test, even as a warm-up. Start at maybe 80, maybe doing 25s, 75, 100, 125, 50. Okay, 4 threes, there's your 12-minute warm-up. By the 12th minute, you've got your heart rate maybe into the, say an individual's got the heart rate 140, but they've done it nice and progressive so their legs feel good. They don't jump on and shoot the system sort of up really high. You guys are using about 15 watts down right now. Okay, so you jump on a bike and ride at 100 watts. That is very low, but it's still gone up by a factor of, what's that, 7? So your oxygen use has gone up 7-fold. Your heart rate won't go up 7 times. It's probably in the, I don't know, 45 to 65 range, depending on, you know, somebody's fitness, certainly fit adults. And but your heart rate doesn't go up that many times. So what gives you a good idea as to, oh, I'm doing more work actually, because when I'm sat down, I'm only doing 15 watts, maybe 20 watts for light activities. And if you've got that idea that these ramps allow you to get to the end of the warm up, you've done your maybe 175 watts and your heart rate's staying below 140, oh, okay, that's good. I don't normally get that when I'm in off-season mode. I feel quite fit and strong. And okay, here we go for the rest of the session, which may not be to go hard. It may be, you know, to stay at a lower number, but that individual just goes up through these steps. So I think the max, the ramp, and then ultimately using race data, even if it tells you went too hard, to actually say, okay, did I execute on race day what we know? Because there should be a plan in action. You know, I get, you know, with the athletes I work with, you know, we've got a plan. I know what their power should be on the bike. They don't come back and say, I felt really good, so I didn't do the 190, I did the 210. Because that 20 watts is only going to make, what's that? That'd be 40 seconds over 10 miles. That'd be about 400 and something seconds over the Ironman. So, okay, yes, they've gone about 6 minutes quicker, but they've done 20 watts or 10% harder on the bike. They're going to lose that 6 minutes probably in the first 5K, or they'll lose triple that in the last like 4K or something like that, you know. So there's a relationship there. And I think it's important, you know, to not be robotic about it, but to say when it comes to it, if you're in the ballpark of, you know, you need to do perhaps training at 150 or 180 or 200 watts. If you do it and you just get used to it, it almost becomes like autopilot, but you've got that power just to check. Because the day you get on and you think, crikey, I can barely get to 150. And then the sort of warning bells start, God, I had that sore throat when I woke up this morning. And everyone's coughing in the office and I can barely get to 150 watts on my legs. There's something wrong. Right, bin it. That is an indicator in your warm-up that your body just is not right. If you were going on pace, you'd already be doing the pace and you'd be pushing yourself to think, oh, I can do it tonight. I've just got to push through this. And many athletes, you know, they just won't give themselves a proper sort of reason to not train hard. They always think they have to train hard with power, particularly with power, whereby your experience says, well, look, I get fit on this amount of watts, I don't need to do any more. Training isn't who does the most. Training is how you train you, which is different to the next person. And, you know, I've had people do Ironman at like, I mean, amateurs do, solid amateurs, but do the bike leg at 280 and do like a 455, 450. And go on to do, you know, well under 10 hours, more like 9.5 or so. But other people that do it at only 140 and they can still do a 540, 550 because they're smaller. That's their number, so they deliver it. So, you know, people have heard too many numbers. At the moment you tell them what their max is, you know, firstly they say, oh, maybe I could have gone a bit harder, which is incorrect. Because I often take a video of them in like the last couple of minutes and they look in bits, you know, and you just go, look, here you go, you know, because they've started shutting their eyes and just looking through one eye at the number. They're not compass mentors what you're doing. And so, you know, it's like, no, this was your max. But the second sort of question is, well, is that good? And it's like, well, it's, you know, it's not good if you want to be in team, you know, Ineos Grenadier. You know, it isn't very good news. But it's also your numbers. So if it's your numbers, it's how we use those. And it's not to say, oh, blimey, Sebastian Kienle rides at 280 watts for an Ironman and I've just maxed out less than that. Yeah, he's a pro, you're not. Bingo. You know, none of this is a surprise, but it's you know, numbers are very harsh. They're very harsh, but they're a tool. And if you use them in a good way, actually it can make it more enjoyable. Who wants to blow up in their, you know, one Ironman that they spend all year, you know, saving up for and training for, and get it all wrong on the bike because they get this silly idea that they feel so fresh they think they can ride harder than they can, because there's no power meter saying this is too hard, this is too hard, and they keep pushing because people are flying by. Well, that might be a poor swimmer that's a great biker flying by you don't know. So it's I think power takes a little bit of time, and for some people it'd be too difficult, whether it's bike or run power. There's just too much headspace for them to give to those numbers. But it doesn't have to be complicated. When people are trawling through data, you don't need to trawl through it. There's some very simple metrics you get back. When people are like looking for the secret bit in their data, it's like it's not there. You can see certain tweaks to somebody's habits. Maybe they're just not good at delivering really like controlled sessions, or they always sort of shy away from doing the really easy days, because they always like to do a little bit of, as they call it, tempo, and said, well, when do you do easy days where your legs are basically floating along, you don't even know what your wattage is, you're in zone 1, but most importantly you're chatting to your friends and you're just getting time in the bank. And with all these metrics that are coming along, not directly relating to power, but to heart rate, to power, to all these things, people have become number crunchers to the extent they're comparing too much. And I think you got to enjoy it. I love the training and I like looking at the data, but I wouldn't want to trawl through data all the time. With enough athletes, I'm trawling through their data. I don't really want to be trawling through this session saying, what speed did you run tonight? And what was your heart rate? And I think it was 130, 145. I don't know how far I went. I ran through some woods and through roads and some trees and some bits and pieces, and that was it. 45 minutes on my feet. Not overanalyze it, When you get to that specific, I've got to sit there and do Ironman power on a turbo trainer for 2 hours, that's when you get specific and you look at the number and say, okay, I sit here at 190 watts. Yeah.
Are you worried that people are becoming too reliant on the numbers and the gadgets and the data?
I don't think people are. I just think some people just, it feeds their kind of their mindset, that they kind of think somewhere, if they look hard enough at those numbers, they're going to find something that is there that isn't actually there. It's like, look, I can, you can certainly tease at somebody's power, their aerodynamic position, their nutritional intake, their their savviness about how they use their power, but you don't really trawl through every session to do that. And I think maybe some people are a bit obsessed with all the data that can come out from like training peaks and stuff, and they keep want to push up, I don't know, the IF, the TSS, etc. Like, we don't even know most of those metrics have a real solid basis on training. What we know is if you want to absorb, you've got to stay below 80% of max. Okay, that's the number one global rule. Nobody's come back and said actually that's rubbish, because we know from guys like Stephen Seeler and the stuff that he's put out there and all the research that looks at what do endurance athletes actually do, they stay below 80% of max. The thing is, what they can do below 80% of max is massive. They're more likely down at 60, 65% of max a lot of their sessions. They're cruising along heart rate wise, yet you look at them from the outside and think, wow, they must be going quite hard. No, they're not. They'll do endurance bike legs at 40% of peak power. But if you've got a 500 watt peak engine, of course, for a male athlete, they're still riding at 200 watts for 4 or 5 hours. For some people, that's their time trial they can do for 10 miles. So it's a different engine mindset. But I do think that some people sort of, they just get lost in the numbers. There's, do your training, stay below that 80%, and certainly know how to pace and know how to gauge, am I absorbing? If those ramp test sort of data drop, and at 175 watts now, it wasn't the 140, it's now 132, because you've got a good solid block of training, you've been sleeping well, life's been good to you, everything seems to be going in a good place. Okay, it might drop down, but it's not miraculously going to keep going and going. I think it's very important that people enjoy it, and if you see that you can actually 8 times out of 10, I would say, I get people to train easier. And then you can see that they get better. Like, whoa, how am I getting better? Because you're training me easier. I used to hammer so many sessions, have so many club sessions that turned into races. I thought I was really training hard. It's like, you don't train hard, you train smart. And that's about, if you look at training, after a while, if you're doing training and we're not in the middle of winter, we're in this current period of between about March and October. If you're training in that period and you do it consistently, you'll get to a point where it won't keep exponentially going, but you can start seeing that a certain power, maybe that you could run on a treadmill at a certain speed, you can start looking at it and going, wow, my data's pretty good right now. I don't get numbers that low all the time, I must be in a good position.
Yeah.
Conversely, the person that pushes too hard is constantly in a situation where they're actually shoving that if you like biological engine too hard, and it won't get better. And so I think all these numbers can make people do that. They can be pushed towards, pushing up maybe just the volume, maybe just the number of times they think they're going to use speed work as part of getting faster. If nobody went above 80% of max and they just kept below that number, they would be staggered at how fit they were. They may need to do certain bits of additional work to get used to, certainly like the short distance intensity stuff is done at a high enough level that you need to be ready for that kind of muscular work. But people would say, wow, I'm aerobically really fit, but my muscles just need to adapt to doing the effort. They wouldn't be unfit. They would just not be ready to quite push their muscles at race intensity, but their fitness is ready to do that. With too many numbers, I think you get sort of data overload, paralysis by analysis. You basically, people are just so that, they're still trying to push things up, and you say, but you're out of zone 1 too much. Yeah. But I need to run it, 6 minute kilometers for my Ironman. But if you can't do it aerobically now, every session's a stress. Yeah. If you do it and you absorb it, one day you might be able to do that in zone 1, but not everyone can, ride at 200 watts and keep it in zone 1. Some people, that's their 10-mile TT. Some people are like, yeah, that's easy. I'm at 118 beats. Somebody else could be at 180 beats and going flat out. Mm-hmm. So yeah, number crunchers and too many gadgets are, they're in all fields of life, but I think in sport, it just detracts from just getting on with, learning how to move efficiently through swim, bike, run. And if you put the time in, not the effort, if you put the time in to just concentrate and enjoy the process, what will be. There's nothing about, oh, I am going to become, my best, my best and become the club champion. You've still got to start with your raw materials, and if you don't enjoy it, you'll be out of the sport before you've even got time to develop and to learn the tricks of the trade. So yeah, I'm not worried about it, because I think that in the end people realize that the data overload doesn't actually work. So they love to hear, get off Strava, don't post it for everybody else's kind of reasons that stresses you every time you go out the door. Go out and do your run, and not feel that there's some kind of, well, is that okay? And you wait for this crowd of people to tell you yes or no. And in the meanwhile, you've just enjoyed your run. And maybe that's the worst part, not necessarily the data, but the social awareness and the sort of the socializing of sessions to compare. Really, it's a training session. What does it mean to anybody else anyway? You're not racing. Come race day, your training should look like you were going quite easy, but your races should look like you go quite hard. Yeah. So I don't believe in that, train hard to race easy. No, the data says exactly the opposite. The data says elite athletes train incredibly easy most of the time. They do some hard work, but they race themselves less often than most amateurs, and they race themselves absolutely into the ground and quite happy not to race for for several months, as opposed to somebody keeping going back to racing thinking, if I do enough racing I might actually get faster. Well, maybe experience can be improved upon, but you don't get faster and faster, and that's the secret. Oh, you just do lots of races, that's how you get faster. Yeah,
definitely.
It's interesting. Many discussions have been had with coaches around that.
Absolutely.
About what?
Racing or training harder to race easier.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many people actually believe that is the way to go.
I mean, there's certain things, and particularly with power. One of my, it's not a sort of my session. I've seen it crop up, but this idea of overgeared efforts. And I saw something about David McNamee. It was in I think it was in 220. He was doing like 10-minute blocks, 60 RPM. So he's doing 10-minute blocks, which is quite long, but you're working at or just below, certainly for most people, below threshold, okay? Yeah. But because you're at 60 RPM, the heart rate doesn't really reflect that you're working that hard. But when you look at the power, you are working that hard. So you take a given athlete and, they might be working at, let's think of an easy number to divide by 60. They might be working at 240 watts, which is 4 watts a rev, okay? Yeah. But that person's Ironman power because it's not at threshold, which is 75%, it's actually at 55%. They might be doing their Ironman at 190. Well, 190 at 85 RPM is something like, what, 2.5 watts a rev, or 2 and a bit. So when they push hard at 4 watts a rev for these blocks of time, they get strong, even though the heart rate doesn't shoot up. They might go just into zone 2, and it's not breaking the rule of stay in zone 1, because this is strength training on the bike. But what they notice is when they go back to Ironman power, wow, that feels really easy. And so in that case, you are training hard. It's hard work to push at threshold at 60 RPM. You are shoving the pedals, but that dates back to, on my wall, I've got a picture of Francesco Moser doing the hour record in 84, and they talked about it then. I've sort of trawled through old kind of bits you can find online. They talked about it then. David McNamee's talking about it, however many years later that is. There's something about this low cadence strength work. And so many clients sort of say, oh, keep that in. I really like that. I really like that session. They're actually, and also because you feel like you've done some hard work, but you haven't overloaded the cardio system, you can feel a little bit like, not dead legged, but a little bit heavy in the legs sometimes. But you don't feel like you've just tried to do it at 95 RPM and spin really hard and do that kind of classic interval that people think is going to make a difference. Yeah. All that does is plays around with a tiny bit more percent that you can push at threshold. You might be able to tolerate a tiny, another 10, 20 watts at threshold, which doesn't relate to the typical triathlete anyway, because they're working so far off that. And it's so mentally hard to train that system of lactate tolerance when it isn't actually something you're going to use on race day. You're better to train your strength endurance aspect at 60 RPM. So that's hard work, but it's not really that hard. You might do, most people might do 4 to 6 lots of 4 to 6 minutes. So you're talking, it might be a 16-minute hard work block with recoveries. It might be 36 minutes. I think David McNamee was doing like 4 by 10. There's no magical number, but it's just this idea of, that is hard work, but that isn't, 10 athletes go out on a bike ride and every time they get to a hill, they race one another as fast as possible. Sort of thinking that's how you get quicker. Like, no, that's not how you get quicker. that's just racing in training. And that's somebody that comes back and, does a 2-hour, 3-hour ride on a Saturday or whatever, and then spends the afternoon kind of, semi-comatose on the sofa because they've just worked too hard in zone 2. And you slow them down, like, oh, no, I can't go that slow. You're slowing me down. Like, no, I'm going to make you quicker. But you've been going out thinking you can force yourself to go faster. So I think that hard work, easy work thing, it's the biggest challenge. But I just stand by it. It works. It's just if somebody's got the patience to do it, and nobody's ever come back and said, no, that you got that wrong. I can train faster than that and get better. And I'm looking at the data and saying, how do the best athletes train? And it's not just, they do 20 hours, that's a pro. The data's been done on amateurs as well, and they still come back with the same thing. You've got to be, most sessions are easy. You could do most sessions all over again. Not maybe the longer sessions on your feet and on the bike, because there would be an element of neural fatigue, but you're not getting back and you're absolutely exhausted every time. So maybe that's where the metrics and the social media need to be just diluted a bit so that people don't feel like they've got to force the pace up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool.
We'll be done on the power.
That is the power question.
So I've got a question that's it's not power related, but it's heart rate and pace related. So so a kind of a very common thing that crops up with athletes that we coach at running clubs, tri club, is this kind of idea that for a certain pace, so an easy, so you do like a time trial, a 30-minute time trial for running or something like that.
Yeah.
The pace zones that come away from doing those kind of, time trials.
Yeah.
When you then try and link that with the heart rate data, well, my heart rate says I just ran 40 minutes in zone 5, zone 6, but I was doing my pace at, my zone 1, zone 2. So how does that work out? And then the beauty of things like Garmin now is the sort of telling people when you're peaking. You're looking at all that was very unproductive. The unproductive, people really can't handle the unproductive stuff.
No. And
it's trying to make sense of that, and it's very difficult. You've tried to read into it a lot. but there's not a lot of stuff that says what that.
Well, yeah, but see, my argument is that, you know, the device can't measure whether your neural system has just been working on your left arm hand entry, or whether or not you've really, you know, you've got a better bike position and you really feel comfortable. So a lot of it that says that supposedly there's no adaptation happening is rubbish, because you are producing an oxygen turnover. You know, if you said, I'm not going to ride over, let's say 150 watts, and all you did was ride up to and including 150 watts, you said, not going to go above that, your muscles would be surprised if you then tried to ride at 200 for 3 hours, but you wouldn't be unfit. You'd really be quite fit. And what you wouldn't do is I'd see the biggest problem. At least 7 out of 10 people want to look at their data and they say, yeah, I want to coach you. The biggest thing I see is they just do too many sessions where they're not even anywhere near staying in that zone 1.
Yeah.
And so Garmin, when it says unproductive, doesn't help, because people sort of say, yeah, but you're asking me to do sessions of Garmin saying they're not productive. And I'm like, well, it's rubbish. It is productive, because we know you're sat down doing 15 watts normally, and you've just gone and sat on your turbo trainer at 150. Well, that's 10 times as much oxygen. How can 10 times as much oxygen not be a training effect?
Yeah.
So it's, the training effect happens at a lower level, I think, than people realize. And there's certain national governing bodies, I know the Norwegian one, you know, they start at 55% of peak heart rate as a training effect point. And skill work. I mean, you don't go up and down the pool. Well, I've seen it. People doing skill work and then they try and check their heart rate at the end. It's like, you're not doing anything that's cardiovascular. You know, you're training your system to try and get through the water, and you're looking at how heart rate. So, you know, back to that thing earlier, you know, about what tool would you use? And I said heart monitor. Sometimes I'd say just use your head and get out the door. And just, you know, just listen to your body. Don't think the device knows better than you. It can sometimes nudge you. Not that we've got time for HRV, but, you know, something like that can nudge you sometimes, say, something's not quite right. But ultimately, many people could train easier. And I'm not trying to, you know, slow the rest of the world down. I just know that there are too many people that think they can get into sessions and kind of keep pushing them. And you see day after day how much they push themselves. And they're going around in circles, they're getting injured, they're getting burnout, they're not maybe the nicest people to be around because they don't recover properly. So I think, you know, we need to, you know, use the power, use the heart rate, use anything like that, but stay below that 80% of max, because we know that's where we get the most return on investment. You know, if it was, we have to go to threshold every time and this so-called sweet spot is there for us to do, then do it. But many people have come up with things that, you know, that 60 RPM works. It's not just a sort of like a fallacy, but there are some certain things to do with certain sweet spots of training and stuff like that. I'm not going to say you shouldn't at least train at, certainly the longer distance athletes, at delivering the power and be correctly paced. But Ironman athletes don't just sit at their Ironman power all the time. They're way below that, just getting time in the bank. And many athletes that think that it's too easy to go out and ride at their, you know, I've got athletes at 140, I've got athletes that could be riding it at 240, but they could do it, but that's too stressful to do, because you're also concentrating on a number all the time. And I think it's better to just, like, you know, ride your bike or enjoy being in the pool or go off for a run. And if you do the right thing and you come back and say, it was, you know, it was an hour steady state running, I stayed in zone, it was great views, I was chatting to somebody, blah, 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 great, good training session. Not look at that and go, I could probably push that faster, I reckon, you know, because most sessions are, I think it was an article on Runner's World, and the person said that, you know, they should be guilt producing the easy. And I thought that was a great term, because it's like, you should get back and go, of course I could do it again. You know, that's the whole point of training. It is the reproduction of time after time after time that makes the training effect. Not, I've just pushed myself, that must have made a difference. Training at interval level, when you look at the research, if you take fit people that have had a conditioning process, yes, they might push their threshold up, maybe, you know, 20, maybe 30 watts at most, but that's a peaking process and they're done. They don't then say, if we start at this point and do another 6 weeks, they're going to add on another, you know, 20, 30 watts. But people believe that. So you only need a very short period of time for the, talking to the people that sort of sprint and Olympic based, you don't need very long to put the icing on the cake. It's quite a small amount of time.
Yeah.
What you need is efficient movement patterns. You need, hours and hours and hours of swimming and biking. What you don't need is this idea that you can do a few intervals and you'll be fast. But we've all heard the people that say, yeah, I'm just going to do a bit of speed work. It's like, oh wow, I didn't realize, one bit of speed work was all it took, sort of thing. So yeah, and I get it. It is complicated because the more you understand about it, the more you realize that it is so about the person's head, not the physiology and the science. It's about their head, and can they believe you? And I'm, particularly that I coach athletes, I say, well, you're paying me, if I don't deliver, then I haven't really done a very good job. And I'm telling you everything I know that I've learned, and it will work. If it has to, dent your ego, or if it has to mean you have to think about what groups you play your games with, i.e. your swim, bike and run groups, okay, fine. That's what you've got to do. You don't just jump in with the fastest swimmers thinking, well, I'm bound to be able to swim with them if you're not a fast swimmer. And I think, it's you have to train the athlete's brain to really stop making out that they're not really trying, and stop making out that, there's kind of like everyone else is doing so much more speed work. I think you have to kind of get to the person, look, just please be patient and watch. And the day they get those eureka things, say, wow, I've just stayed in zone 1. I'm really flying. I can't believe the difference. Yes, we've had to look at all the things that are stopping them, because training is, for a lot of people is what? 1 to 2 hours per day, possibly, 7 to 14 hours will cover a heck of a lot of people in that window. Yeah, there'll be people doing a lot more good on them. Yes, there'll be people that are struggling to get, 5 or 6 hours done a week. But most people, if you just end up being consistent, you can actually really get fit. But don't break yourself in the process by trying to do some humongous training. And sometimes you see what people have had forced upon them by coaches, and it's just like, oh my God, they certainly, A, don't know what they're doing, but B, they weren't listening to what your body was creaking under the load, because you weren't seeing any metrics that show you were getting better. And actually people then stop doing some of the sessions, and they start lying that they're doing sessions, or they start, to really fear sessions. It's like, that's not the way to do it. It's a nurturing process. It's a very slow cell by cell development. And, if you enjoy it, you're going to want to keep going back. If it feels like every time you're pulling teeth, is it really something that you think is a great hobby, or does it end up being a second job? And it's not a very nice job either, because you don't enjoy it. And I don't like seeing that. I'd like athletes to go, oh my God, I could not have believed we got to this point in this way, because you were slowing me down, because I was focusing more on my sleep and looking after myself and getting good body work, etc. I thought I had to push really hard, because that's what I see people doing. No, you see all the wrong people pushing hard. If you watch clever athletes, particularly good age group athletes that know their stuff, and the pros, they do not push themselves hard. The adverts, the bits you see, but most of the time they're incredibly lazy. And a good athlete is lazy. They only do the sessions that they need to do. They don't add extra or push harder. That's a real sign of a lack of probably confidence in the process. Because what we do now is still going to take weeks for the process to actually cause a training effect. And meanwhile, everything that builds up over those weeks, it's almost like juggle everything. Juggle your sleep, your work, your travel patterns, your eating, your alcohol, everything. Juggle all that and get it about right. Enjoy it and just keep repeating. I mean, it's not a difficult process, but people overcomplicate it.
100%.
Definitely. Cool. So just ignore the Garmin.
Ignore the Garmin.
Well, Garmin. Use it as a tool. But Garmin, the amount of times I've seen it, particularly on the handlebars, several times when you're warming up, in about 12 minutes, you get that thing to tell you, what's going on, and it said good, and I felt absolutely just horrible. Thinking, oh God, my leg's feeling bits. And then you feel brilliant, and it just says good, and you think that's completely wrong. I feel absolutely, like, my heart rate is like as low as I've ever had it, and I'm riding going, oh my God, this is brilliant, I love it, and it just says good. It could be a little bit more descriptive by saying, oh my God, that would be a good one, or go home, not just good.
Yeah.
But people will believe it. People are like, I definitely need 2 hours recovery because Garmin's told me, And I'm like, yeah, I've had that after warm-ups for time trials. It's told me I need 2 hours, and I've only just warmed up, and I'm thinking, well, I'm not in trouble. It just doesn't understand me,
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, I've seen a lot of people crushed by the I thought I was training really well, and then it just told me I was unproductive, and I don't know what to do. You know, it's
And that's it. It's like, Garmin's are great. I think we've learned a lot by using them. But simple training is really, if you think about it, it's an intensity and a duration. That's all the cells in your body know. You've moved for 45 minutes and you've done a run that's in the 130, 145 range. That's an intensity and a duration. How far you got, well, it depends on who you are. It depends on the condition underfoot, and that's how your body develops, is intensity, duration. When you start dividing the distance by your heart rate, when you start looking at average speed, etc., you're kind of complicating it. It's like, look, it's just I just look at sessions and say, I want you to do 2 hours in zone 1, so it's an intensity and it's a duration. I don't want to complicate it beyond that. You might say overgeared work, right? I want you to work at just below threshold for 6-minute blocks, and I want you to do that 4 times over. But I think maybe there's some sort of simplicities that more people should sign up to, and they don't. They sign up to the complicated. They would just want all these metrics that they're kind of talking about, and most people don't know when they see TSSD. But what you tell me what that actually is measuring and how it can measure it, and they don't know. And it's not to say that there aren't good bits, but there are plenty of numbers that get generated that I think are that they're kind of like fake news, because they sort of tell somebody something about their session. It's like how many cars went by you when you went for a run. Well, that doesn't mean 55 cars went past you on your run. Yeah, okay, if it measures that, that's great. But what does that do to your training session? It doesn't do anything. So and I get it. It's complicated because people have invested and want to believe that it is a really it's a really challenging thing to do. Of course it is. You're balancing it around all the rest of your life, but you don't make it any harder by, in a sense, adding all these numbers that at work you wouldn't do anything where they just start measuring this extra number because they can measure it. You measure the things that are applicable to that particular, whether it's temperature of bread, whether it's somebody's production, whether it's something in accountancy that means that the bottom line is measured. You don't measure something accidental to do with that business that has nothing to do with the bottom line if you're trying to find out what was their bottom line like. But people do that with triathlon. They sort of measure some of these things, and certainly if you can measure like wattage versus speed in certain positions, great, because we know if people can muck around with their CDA and make themselves more efficient, they can go faster. But they sort of, they measure some of the other things like, I've already done 2,000 kilometers this year. Okay, that's great, but is that good? Is that like more than you've done before? Is that in the right mixture of training sessions? Have you stayed below 80%? Was a lot of that going to the gym and doing really high intensity sessions where you were doing some kind of HIIT program? And I think to get better at triathlon, I think it's simpler than people realize. But I think they kind of don't realize you just got to put the time in, and you've got to listen to people that tell you about your swim technique, or that you shouldn't pump your tires up to 130 psi, or that you need new running shoes. Some of the basic things get missed, and yet they're looking at the metrics to try and find out, well, how can I get quicker? And it's like, well, just keep doing the things and enjoying them, but don't get distracted by the Garmin gadget, by the rotor power meter, by the clock that is on the wall at the pool. It's lovely to be able to do these sports, but I hate it when people cannot do them without having something on their wrist or something in front of them, and just say, I actually had an experience with the local bike shop to me, and they said a guy came in on a Saturday and sort of said, can you fix my power meter? And they're like, it's Saturday, there's no way we can do this. Monday morning, it'd be quiet, come back. It's like, no, can you fix my power meter? And said, well, just, come back. It's not vital. It's not going to affect the rest of your bike. No, I can't ride without my power meter. Wow. And this person didn't ride because their power meter wasn't working. Seriously. Wow. Seriously. And it's like, wow, that's like, and that's what we don't want. We don't want people to sort of say, you want to be doing some sessions where you sort of turn it off or turn it upside down. So right, try and aim at and feel what it's like to be 160 watts and see out whether you can do it. And, that's not going to be a big shove. It's going to be relatively light, and then sort of flick it over, go, okay, right, now if I can do 200 and get that proprioception, try and swim and say, right, I'm going to try and swim, presumably people can do it, right, I want to swim a 50-second 50 meters. Right, okay, I want to try and swim a 45-second 50 meters now, and feel the difference of just 5 seconds per 50 meters. Because a professional runner or swimmer, if you said, right, swim a 60-second 100, bang, they do it. Right, swim a 64, bang, they do it. They're so in tune with it. And that's where I think you don't listen to the gadgets, you listen to your body. And then you start realizing that a lot of it is about, you've got all these signals going to your muscles, and all you've got to do is make them coordinate, and bingo, you can swim, you can bike, you can run, and not put this layer of complexity of data, because it never used to be complex. It really didn't. But you said about like I thought earlier about, you said about the beginner, would they benefit? Everyone benefits. The pros have power meters. There's very few now that don't ride on power to realize just what kind of day they're having and how far, not Olympic distance, but clearly a half Ironman and full Ironman. Years ago, some people had the perfect ability to pace, but that must have been so difficult to get on the bike and go, right, how hard do we go then?
Yeah.
Yeah. Got that one wrong many times. Oh, I'm feeling awesome. Come on. And you get to the end. No, I've done it again.
Absolutely. Are we on to nutrition now?
We are, yeah.
I mean, do you chop this? Do you chop this and do it separately or not?
No, we just smash straight through, don't we? Yeah. So if you're good, we'll just smash straight through it. Absolutely. I think Muffin, you're right, Muffin, aren't you? Yeah, she's good. She's good. Muffin's good. Come on then. Let's go.
Perfect. So nutrition. So in your years as both a competitor and a coach, what are the most valuable lessons that you've learned, and what do you pass on to your athletes?
We'll say 2 or 3.
Go 3.
I had about 57. I had 57. Yeah. I mean, the crikey, if you think training is like opening Pandora's box, I mean, nutrition is like, I think that the downside of nutrition is that people have obviously their individual preferences of food, full stop. Some people who say the word curry, they're like, yes. Other people are like, oh God, I hate it. And so when you look at the nutrition to fuel an athlete, there's the first starting point. Some people just not good at eating the right foods. They like other foods that don't necessarily make them a better athlete. But to be fair, you don't want to start totally giving foods up because you think they're going to make you faster or slower. That's way too beyond most people's. You're not going to eat a certain food and it makes you slower. But there might be a point where certain foods in races clearly don't work with people, and therefore, when you're thinking competition mode, you've got to be on a simple fuel kind of setup. There's still people, luckily, doing events this year, and they're sort of like, well, what do we do with the with the taper? Some are new to my as I call it, stable, and you're like, right, let's just keep it simple in the last week. Don't do anything exotic, don't try new things, just keep it fairly simple and bland, and just go with what you've had before. And oftentimes, I was, I guess, a few years back, I just came up with this test it acronym. So TEST, test it. And it's try everything several times in training. And so you get people to think about this. Right, I've got to try these things. I've got to try my, I'm a SIS ambassador. Okay, try Beta Fuel. See what it's like. It runs at 16% concentration. So in a bottle like that, you can have 120 grams. So, huge amount. Great for fueling 70.3s, 2 bottles of that, and most people are sorted. But you've still got to try it. You've got to shake it. It does get gloopy if you don't shake it well enough. But try it in training, get an idea of the taste, what you like, go into the race, bingo. Okay? Nothing too changed on race day. But I think that the thing with nutrition that is there's an emotive element to it, but it is just fuel. And if that fuel makes you smile and makes you happy, that's better than the person that says, oh, I can't eat chocolate. It's like, why can't you eat chocolate? And they sort of think that that's the reason why they're not at the top of their game, that they sort of give it up. And it's like, look, it was my dad that said, you're a long time looking at the lid. And if you think about that one, you're a long time looking at the lid. Eventually, we're going to be pushing up daisies. So don't give everything up that you like. Yeah. And people do that, and they think that's the secret as to the non-Stanfords and the Keenlays and the brownies and stuff. Like, no, they can eat weird and wonderful diets that go that go straight to the heart of, yeah, that makes me train well, but they all know that at a certain point they have to dial in. And I think there was a classic instance where Norman Stadler, in his preparation for Hawaii, used to say something like 10 weeks out. He said 10 weeks out, I stopped the chocolate. I am not happy. And it was perfect. It was brilliant. He's like, he cannot have it 10 weeks out to chisel himself down to be race ready. But that's worth it, because the guy is at the front of the pack. And I think, nutrition, there's fads or there's tweaks, but most of it isn't really, everyone's got to, I know we've got a question about, that fat adaptation, and everyone's got to, nitrate load, or everybody's got to be on certain things. There are probably some generalizations that a lot of people don't probably practice their fueling in training or racing enough. When you say how many, I did a 3-hour ride, my question is more about, okay, were you in zone 1 because that's what we said? Number 2, how many grams per hour were you taking? Not like, oh, well, I took a bottle out with maybe a scoop. I mean, that's not good enough for 3 hours. If it was a 2-hour session and they were doing it fasted, okay, did you just have coffee? Did you go out on electrolytes, 0 calorie intake? Okay, good. The key with that is the 45-minute delay afterwards to basically let the body recover its fat stores in the muscles, not just get back home because you've been on a fasted session, you eat like a horse. That defeats the object of that session. So everything can be tweaked. But I do think that people try and look for that mystery magic bullet, that they think if they eat a certain way, they give up certain foods. And, you've got to listen to your body. I do certain things with athletes that I know works, and it's not, I don't think, well, I know it works because I've got lots of different people at pro level, motor racing people that are runners. They go, oh my God, that's amazing. I didn't realize that. And it's a certain tweak to the diet. And it's one of my kind of little things that I don't reveal. But it's just one of those things. It's got an absolute logical basis on it, and it helps the individual to find the foods that work for them. And they do it and they just go, oh, that's better. I don't get bloated on race morning. Or that's better. I've realized what energy bars are better for me. But most of the time, they've probably got some of that right just through experience. And I think if you do that test it thing, we'll see whether you can just do, your long summer ride and you can get away with just fluid and gels. Some people say, no, I have to eat something. I need a bit, half an energy bar at 2 hours or else I get too empty. Other people are like, I can do the whole thing on just fluids. I don't have a problem. Well, they're all trying it and they're all getting their response, but there is no one kind of perfect scenario. Not one thing can be said, oh, it always works for everybody. Some people hate gloopy stuff and they are going slow enough that they don't need massive amounts of carbs and they can get away with a bit more savory. Because you look at their fat burning, you look at their pace and you say you need some carbs, but you don't need 80 grams an hour. Yeah. If you're doing 120 watts, that's like 80 grams an hour is like putting 80 watts back in, okay? They won't be needing that amount of carbs. You end up even going into like a positive carb situation where they're just like, I can't drink that much. So I think there's an individual level that is probably the biggest lesson, is that you've got to treat the individual, and they can't just say, well, I know such and such, and they swear by it. Okay, try it. I know the beta fuel works, and people are like, that's brilliant, that's my race day sorted. I don't have to grab my Enovit stuff. I can just be self-contained. I can maybe use special needs, but there's no way I say that to them with a week to go. They've tried that months in advance. Yeah. If there is it's a bit gloopy, I don't know whether I want to shake the bottle. Okay, that's your concern. If you can't shake a bottle in race day, then maybe you're probably trying to save too much energy, If you can't shake the bottle before you drink it. Or if you've got a straw, you blow down the straw to disturb the carbs. So yeah, I've done like I said, I've done the Camelback stuff, and you work out how to use those things. But most people all put a Camelback on, particularly like cooler races. They'd be okay, but in hot races, like, oh, sit on my back, it'd be too hot. It's like, oh, I couldn't deal with that. Okay, that's not for you. Other people, it would be for them. So yeah, biggest lesson is probably treat the individual, and there's no real trends, I don't think, that haven't been known about. I think the nitrate is probably something that is a better understanding of why certain foods maybe have been popular anyway, that people didn't they didn't know why things worked, but there was just a sensation that, well, that seems to be quite a good thing to eat beets, i.e. beetroots. But I guess the other thing that I noticed is a lot of athletes that get blood tested have lower vitamin D than what they thought, because they think they're outside all the time. They think they're bound to have great vitamin D levels all the sunshine, and they don't. And because that relates specifically to immune system and massively towards like the prevention of fractures and stuff, that's really important to make sure that people check on their vitamin D status and probably end up supplementing. There's very few people that we found that they naturally have got high levels of D, and yet they just assume that, well, it's bound to be okay. They're thinking immune system, they're thinking vitamin C. No, it's more likely vitamin D that would be the issue.
Definitely.
Okay.
See, without revealing anything, you revealed lots of useful.
Yeah.
Blowing down the tube, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have that.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to use
I
that.
don't know what's shaking up the bowl, but I was just blowing the tube. It's fine. Go ahead.
Good.
Next.
So I know you touched on fat adaptation just then, and a lot of athletes now seem to be going down that route. Would you say it's more suited to the longer distance triathletes, so 70.3 Ironman distance?
I mean, I think, the fat adaptation really is at last saying, hey, we don't want carbs and more carbs. People were sort of obsessed with high carb diet and carbo loading equated to improved glycogen.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, a lot of the research didn't necessarily measure where related to increased performance. There's still not necessarily, I mean, it can obviously be that massive carbohydrate depletion would reduce performance, but I think there's more scope for people saying, look, you've got these things called essential fatty acids, so it's definitely worth you considering what fats you take in, with regards to the olive oil, the nuts, the fish, etc. Fat is a good thing, not a bad thing. And there was some research done on runners, and when they really reduced their fat to below, I think it's about 15% or so, they actually reduced their VO2 max and their endurance because they just didn't have something that we need fat in our diet. People can argue what it is, but it's probably no less than 20 to 25% of the diet should be from fat, not like massive amounts of carbs all the time. So I think the fat adaptation rather is it's always been there. That's what happens when you're in zone 1. You just adapt to your body utilizing fats. But you don't necessarily always see performance gains from people that go to really super low carbs, the sort of 50 gram a day carbs. Most people can't hack that. I think it's a very few people that can. And, there would be a little bit of concern about the immune system based on how low you're pushing the carbohydrates and the possibility that you really start to affect the immune system. I think it's probably that, you need a bit of all of it. You probably are going to be something around. I remember years ago, the guy that dealt with Mark Allen and a few elite athletes called Phil Maffetone, who's still around now and makes a lot of sense in what he says. His kind of 180 minus your age still lands you in the kind of middle point of zone 1, and that was a predominant training aspect that he talked about. That makes sense, but he was all on about good quality fats and making the body good as a fat burning engine, and that sort of makes sense. But it's not go ultra low carbs. I wonder whether, certainly looking at some of the research and some of the concerns on the research, they don't seem to be finding improved performance when people do it. You might get better for a block of time at fat adapting, and you've almost shown that you can survive on less carbs. And I like that for the first part of the off season, for people just, look, you're not racing anymore. You don't need to be whacking down loads of drinks. Let's just go back to some healthy, eat your banana on a bike ride rather than have sticky gels and stuff. But also really broaden the group of food you eat by the fact you are starting to think more about quality fats and proteins, because you can always get, carbs are the easiest thing to get. So actually it's the concentration on thinking about fat adaptation is a process that happens in zone 1 with your training, but you've still got to give your body good fats. They still make up the myelin sheath in the muscle. They still make up a huge store of energy in your muscles that could well be greater than the glycogen store. So although I don't want to complicate it too much, there's something called intermuscular triglycerides, and they sit there in between the muscle fibers. And when you do these fasted sessions and you stop and you don't give the person a recovery drink or any food, because circulating fats are in the bloodstream, they then go back into the muscle. So your body's already storing fat after the session. Because they're circulating lactate even in zone 1 up to 2 millimoles, that also goes back into the muscle as glycogen. So even though you've given the person nothing to eat, they store fats and glycogen back in the muscle. And if you get good at fat adaptation, you're better because you've just basically made the right diet to help that fat storage. You don't get back and whack a, sugary recovery drink down if you don't need it. You let your body take its resources and restock the muscle. At which point, your appetite probably comes back to normal after 45 minutes instead of it being a bit erratic when you try and eat something straight after a session. Sometimes it just doesn't seem to digest very well, particularly run sessions, long run sessions, we get very hot. I think fat adaptation, it is a part of the process, but I think it's more of almost like a periodization thing where you just teach the person, look, you can go lower on your carbs. You don't need to be always thinking I've got to have 1 gram per kilo per hour. You can do plenty of sessions without it. And also as part of your diet, you don't just focus on getting this glycogen back in. You look at, are you taking foodstuffs that have essential fatty acids? Is there a good balance of different proteins? And therefore what's left over is this gap that you put carbs in, but you don't start with loads of carbs and go, oh, I don't really eat much. You hear how many times we hear people say, yeah, I've kind of got rid of most of the fat out of my diet. I'm like, no, I'm like this with the olive oil, because I that's got energy, that adds flavor, that's a good fat, and also that makes it kind of like a meal that's going to sit there for longer. The more you go high carb, the more you just end up eating soon afterwards, because you don't necessarily get this bounce of sort of hypoglycemia that people sort of think, but you just don't have enough slow release of energy. So in your sessions, I think people might sometimes have, 0 carbs because it's a fasted session. Other sessions, they might have a higher carb, but you might have meals afterwards that are much more protein fat based. Other times you might have much more high carb because you want to get the carbs back in because you need them for a quality session that sort of follows. So there isn't one answer as to what meal works, because in a different scenario, the right meal from the day before just wouldn't sit very well with the athlete. And I think fat adaptation, it's not a buzzword, but it's actually a concept that's far more complicated than just people dropping carbs down and thinking that's going to have a big effect. I think of what I've seen, that's quite a tricky thing for most people to do. Pros may be able to get away with it, but I think being a breed that can just concentrate on anything that makes their performance better, I think that maybe they've got the headspace and the support system, and they can, if they feel rubbish, they can just, disappear. They don't have to go and work with workmates. They can just go back home and just go, I feel rubbish because I'm on the adaptation week and I'm having 0 carbs. It might make a difference, but it's not like there's, things this high of research saying fat adaptation is the way to go. It's part of the training process, definitely, but that's what Zone 1 is doing anyway. When people say, do you think I should do some fat burning sessions? I'm like, you already are. You just don't realize it. And we can't do anything more but start you fasted, do it for longer periods, which means the fatty acid usage goes up, and not follow it with too many high sugary things, just to make sure those IMTGs go back into the muscle. So, there's some tweaks which can still help that person be fat adapted. The next day may have nothing to do with fat. They may be doing, a more higher quality session at a tempo that requires they have to have carbs. And what I've seen in some of the literature recently is they're saying that really low carb stops the people delivering and able to deliver this higher quality work. So it may not be good when you need to deliver quality work. You could give people all manner of diets and they would all get through, but I think the mixture is probably nearer a middle ground of lots of these high quality proteins, good fats in the diet, carbs that are delivered when they're needed but not anymore, and also that as much of it as possible is functional. Gels aren't nutritionally brilliant, but if you're running, you don't really want to grab a sandwich. You'd much rather grab a gel at your certain points in a long run practicing fueling. You don't really want to grab something like some tuck biscuits or a sandwich and try and do that. And why should you? Because people say, but don't you sort of want no, I'm jumping ahead, I'm not going to answer that question because it's one of your questions. You carry on. Because I just looked at it and thought I can't answer that.
I think I know what question it's probably leading into.
We could lead into it.
What are your thoughts on energy gels versus whole foods for racing?
I mean, the thing is, racing isn't a whole food thing. Do you know what I mean? Racing's racing. If you just wanted to get yourself through 140 miles, got to think what it is. You know, for an Ironman, that's not a process that allows the human species to survive. You know, there's plenty of people that don't do it and they still get through life and they're super productive. So if you want to train for Ironman, you've got to do things that I'd say go out of the context of everything's got to be pure and everything's got to be, you know, it's good that people think about the quality of their food, but you can eat standard rolled oats from your supermarket, or you can eat the super expensive organic oats, but you can't tell me that the difference is going to be, you know, possible to measure for the person. Yeah. And there is a group of people that are really worried, and it's horrible to see that they're worried about what they eat all the time. And if you sometimes have to be somewhere and somebody, all you delivered because you're somewhere is like these sandwiches, like, well, okay, I'm eating these sandwiches. You can't go, well, I can't really eat that because of X, Y, and Z. Of course you can eat it. You probably ate it before, but now you don't think you can eat it. And I think that maybe whole foods are certainly things to make sure we get higher percentages of nutrition, but you can't do, or rather you can't optimize an Ironman by trying to do it on whole foods. I think the idea of like the beta fuel and the gels, yeah, but sometimes get a bit of a nut bar or a protein bar, something you really like on the bike to keep the digestive process going. To say to your brain, look, gels and glucose polymers are not real food, so put some real food back in. There's been some people sort of using MCTs, medium chain triglycerides, to try and trigger the body to use more fat on the bike. So yeah, carbs are not good for you. I think you need to do that. So we've seen the odd Snickers bar and things that people have, and they're saying, I want some nutrition that goes beyond just carbs. You would be very at rest, very sleepy if all you did was have carb snacks all the time. Yeah. And it's the same in a race. You need to get your digestion triggered by eating something that maybe is a whole food bar that takes a bit of chewing, and that will have some slowing process with digestion for a while, but it also helps to just keep the body going. Because this idea that it's 7, 8, 9 hours, people have real funny issues with digestion. It's like, well, you will if you don't have anything real, because your bodies just cannot survive on just, you know, and that's why I think these special needs bottles, they're often in there, because I know of a few instances where, you know, they are putting MCTs into a fat that's easily digested. They are putting in protein, more like a protein shake, and they're drinking something that's a much more, you know, it's not slim fast, but do you know what I mean? It's more of a gloopy kind of drink than more carb drink. And it'll probably have things in there that they know really help them to kind of like mid of a long session, get a bit of, you know, that idea that you can sometimes eat something and feel much better versus just having a gel and going, well, that's okay, but that hasn't made me feel any better. It's just giving me some fuel. And I think the whole food, whole foods, yeah, absolutely. That is part of, you know, whole foods, you could argue, is the essential fatty acids, it is the quality carbs. But in a race scenario, depends on what is your moral boundaries. If you want to get through it but be using all the healthiest things out there, absolutely you can. But if you want to go as fast as possible, you probably don't want much of it. And if you do, it's little bits just to keep that digestive process going. And you know, and that's where is somebody moral boundary. Some people are like, I'll whack 250 milligram gels in T2 and I'll just be running as hard as I can. And somebody else will say, I'm just going to take, you know, a little bum bag and I'm just going to eat some dried fruit on the run or whatever. It's like, great, whatever floats your boat. Yeah. But we're not seeing the fastest people at the front of the age group or at the front of the field doing the sultanas and stuff. However, you go back decades and, you know, Dave Scott talked of having figs during the race because they needed high carbs, and they'd have figs and dates and things like that and bananas and stuff because there were not glucose polymer drinks. So they still got through it in reasonable time. But as the drinks and the science improved, I once sort of walked up to Mark Allen. He was doing a Nice race. He had these imagine like the essential fatty acid tablets that you take, you know, they look sort of yellowy, goldies kind of color. They were on the top tube, and I went, oh, why are you using MCT? And he was like, how do you know it's MCT? And I was like, well, I've done my research. I write for 220. I reckon that's MCT. And he's like, yeah, I use that to help my body to basically keep encouraging it to use fat. That's about like a 6.5 hour race. So even at that level, they're thinking about tiny bits of fat to encourage the body to be fat burning. Because you can't really go as hard as possible and think, well, I'll go as hard as possible and see how many grams of carbs I can get down and see if the two equations go together. You're much better to be fat efficient. but I don't think that's anything special about fat adaptation. I just think fat adaptation is talking about this area of probably extreme diet manipulation, which almost fits into the whole food thing. I mean, they're not directly related, but some people sort of don't want carb drinks because they think they're not whole food, so they'll eat very very low carb diets. But you try and do that very low carb diet, wow, I don't think I could do it. It would just be, not that the foods wouldn't be nice, but I just think there's so many foods you exclude, and then you start getting rid of your fruit, then you start noticing there's less fiber, then you start noticing that actually it's just not a sustainable format to eat. And I think that each person should work out how much do they want to take a vitamin D supplement, or are they just going to eat foods that they think are very rich in vitamin D? But if you do go down the route that you think the food is going to provide you with 100%, you've got to eat very, very, very high quality food. Because even people that eat a really high quality diet are surprised that, oh, I thought I'd have high enough, vitamin D, because I eat my, I can't think good foods for vitamin D off the top of my head, but probably it's more like dairy and things like that. It might be, I think spinach might be D-based as well, but I always think this, we can't always survive on drinks and gels and stuff like that. I like playing around with that stuff, but it's nice also to eat real food. In a race, you've just got to work out what works for you, and it's back to that acronym: testing, trying things out times and training. And if you can do it on whole foods and it makes you feel good, and and also that that sits well with everything else you do. I don't think anyone should feel like they've got to do something in a race that they don't really feel. They shouldn't feel as though there were people that were pros using Pro Plus on the bike. Other people use high caffeine gels. Some people would say, oh, I don't touch caffeine because it's a diuretic, which is incorrect, but that's what they think. But there's all these different, even moral boundaries just for caffeine. But when you think all of the components in nutrition and all of the possible moral stances that there can be had, blimey, it really is a Pandora's box. And I don't want anyone to ever think that you've got to do stuff just because there are gels at the aid stations, that the person can't have their own kind of special needs stuff, that they just want to survive on quite literally dried fruit, nuts and stuff like that, and they're quite happy to do so.
Cool.
Good.
We missed that one before.
Oh well, what is your go-to race day?
Lauren.
It's because it flowed well with the fat adaptation.
Okay, we're rolling. Yeah, that's good.
So what is your go-to race day breakfast?
Ooh.
I was thinking across lots of different clients, and I was thinking about also how if you're going somewhere, you need to be, excuse me a second, you need to be doing, it's almost like a similar thing to the Usain Bolt kind of McDonald's thing. They said, why would an athlete like that have chicken from McDonald's? It's like, because he can get it all over the planet, and he can probably get it anywhere near any stadium, any place he's training, and it works for him. And he probably was brought up on a lot of a chicken diet anyway, so it's just a component of his diet anyway. But the thing with the race day is that, particularly with early races, with people being sometimes abroad or in hotels or stuff, you don't always get the food that you really, really would like. So the more that you're mobile with your own stuff, some people, it's 2 cans of rice pudding. That's their go-to breakfast. Okay. It's high carb. There's some fat in there through the dairy. There is some protein. It sits pretty well with them. They've tried it. It works. Other people, they camp and they cook up their oats, and they have some oats with a bit of honey or whatever, and that's what they have. I don't think you want to go mad, because race morning, it's the jitters, and people that are in a hotel that does literally does an all you can eat and will put on a huge, great, banquet for people that are getting up at 4 a.m. to eat something. It's like, but even so, you only need a tiny amount. You're just literally topping off your liver glycogen, a little bit of food in your stomach, but you're certainly not loading up. You were carbo loading for the last 4 days. So, the best race breakfast is the one, again, that's been tried. And I think it does have to have a bit of fat and a bit of protein. It shouldn't really be carbs, because that is going to cause a kind of like an insulin shift. So you see many people are putting in their peanut butter or their cream cheese or whatever. There is again, it's this 3-pronged approach. There's some carbs, there's some fat, there's some protein. It's not just, a high carb energy drink, because that's not good for you. That's just too much of it's too much of a quick hit. So even with the with the rice pudding, I kind of, if somebody wanted to, rice pudding and nuts, I don't know, rice pudding and, or separately eating something to slow down, because you're not trying to, you're almost trying to just keep yourself a little bit full. But what you don't do is have that panic of eating. You can see it the night before at sort of at restaurants around race venues, at pasta parties, etc. Before, people just panic eat, or they think they can get to the pasta party and have a load of pasta and they literally get a tiny plate and then they get hungry. So they should have, often you eat before you get to them, because they're often going to be such small amounts and maybe something you don't like. And I think, again, that comes down to experience, but it also comes down to, it's probably what you like. And although other people might argue that it's not the best thing to do, if you like it, if it doesn't cause stomach disruption, and you can guarantee that you can do it each time, well, if each time you get stomach disruption, then you're clearly not learning your lessons. But if you say, it sits well, it's easy, I just need a can opener, a spoon and 2 cans of rice pudding, bingo,
Yeah.
That's your Usain Bolt, kind of what I think of as a mobile kind of breakfast. Wherever they are, they don't need to get anybody up in the hotel. It doesn't matter where they are, they can have that breakfast. And again, you could see the logic of, rice pudding. That was years ago, that was given by, cyclists doing long distance kind of time trials. They'd be handed up sort of cups of rice pudding, or even just plain rice, because rice is a great carbohydrate, far better than pasta. I mean, far, far better than pasta as a raw material for fueling. So I think, test it, try everything several times in training. Look at also what you do. The athletes have got a race plan. I'll know what they're having for breakfast because they've already worked it out. So we've got that down. If something changes and something changes for the better or for the worse, we had a starting plan. Otherwise, to remember everything you do on race week is really hard. Yeah. And I think people start to really need to write down stuff. And then they can look back and go, oh yeah, I did eat that, and I did take that because I remember it was on the plan. Whereas most people sort of say, oh, I can't remember what I had at the hotel that morning. There was loads of stuff, and I was a bit nervous. I probably overate because I had 3 bowls of cereal, etc., etc. Who hasn't heard that one?
Definitely.
Okay, and last question. Got a gun to your head, what would be your 3 top tips for getting race week nutrition sorted?
Okay, so many race weeks people are in a bit of a panic, and I think you need to stick to the sort of bland foods. Make sure you're just hydrating normally, nothing off normal. Don't ever go hungry, because you want to gradually be increasing glycogen, and you want to be making sure that early on in the week you're definitely not trying to do that panic thing that people do when they're doing less training, so they immediately massively reduce their diet. It's like, look, you need to store glycogen, you need to be happy, you're not trying to reduce food intake. So I think it's that, don't go hungry, hydrate well, and that'll see you through most weeks, but particularly in race week, it stops you from doing anything silly. Secondly, it's kind of at the latter part of the week, really, low fiber, simple carbs. Try not to, if you go somewhere different, still don't try anything too different. Don't massively change your cuisine. Keep to what works. Even if that seems incredibly bland and incredibly robotic to other people, don't change things and start having the, back to the clever sort of curry idea. Don't start doing things that, it's like people have got so much energy. They're often somewhere, they think on holiday. It's like, no, you've traveled all the way to do your half Ironman or whatever. Don't suddenly think that you're on a stag weekend or you're on holiday or whatever. You're not. You're doing a triathlon. So just, keep it simple. Really keep it simple. And eat really well. I mean, I always think the Friday is, look, do close to nothing, eat really well. Saturday, eat, but eat lighter. Maybe sometimes, people will even do like a 20-minute jog. And we kind of, jokingly call it kind of like the bowel bouncer, because they literally go out and start, going and just, they've ate so much, they feel horrible. And they do like 10, 15 minutes outside the hotel, go for a little jog. And they just feel better. They're like, oh God, I feel human again now. because they've just, you've done exactly the opposite of normal weeks. You've just been eating more, hydrating, in a bit of a panic because here comes the race. And there's lots of people running around and biking around the race location that you start to panic about what you should be doing. So again, that is already filled out as to what you do and when. I think lastly, the C's, the caffeines, the carbs. Also, I'm a big fan of carnitine. I know people don't think the research works, but it does. As long as you load up on that enough days, weeks, months even out from an event, that works. But think about your caffeine intake. Do you cut it back in race week so you're not masking any fatigue? Do you just look at your carbs and double check you've got race day sorted out, so that's again in your sort of race week, you've already bought the products, you know what you're going to use. And then also for race day, just definitely know what you are going to take and roughly when, because it's so difficult in race week with the pressures to often travel, finish off work, do the minimal amount of training you've been prescribed, so that you just keep sort of a little bit active, but you're tapering down. Nobody's ever said, do you know what, I just didn't do enough training in the last week. If anything, they just don't, do they? If anything, like, oh, I didn't do much running, but wow, I had a blinder of a run. It's like, many race locations have got people running up and down that aren't doing the event, and people have never thought that as a possibility, that those people are just there with friends and they're running up and down. They're almost like decoys, because people think they've got to do it. I've seen everybody running. It's like, you don't often see people running. So I think, keep it like hydration, simple foods, and don't go hungry. Definitely look at the lower kind of and definitely tried and tested, when I say lower, I mean lower fiber foods towards the end of the week. Eat really well on the Friday. Saturday's a light day. It's not carbo loading day. Definitely not from a big late meal perspective. And think about your potentials for caffeine intake or caffeine reduction, carbs and how you plan to take it in, and also what your race day plan is going to be.
Sorted.
Perfect.
I feel good, because it was a few years back. We went to Leeds Triathlon.
Oh, I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
And one of my athletes absolutely loves caffeine, and I'll make her watch this. She loves coffee. Smashes down way too much. And I said, right, couple of weeks out, no coffee. What? No coffee. So and then breakfast, rice pudding, banana, done. And in the hotel, I thought, coffee after dinner? No. Coach says I can't have caffeine. What? What's that? And then the whole rice pudding no. Well, why do you want to eat rice pudding? And it's like, if Joe Beer is saying that's what I need to do, then I feel like I've done all right. I'm good.
Yeah.
So Joe, thank you very much for your time.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's loads of good points. We'll get the PDF in. We'll put loads of links up to you. Most people will know who you are, but just in case I don't, link to your website and stuff. Thank you very much for your time.
And it was
Thank you. It's been nice to stretch my brain beyond, because you've got. I always think about this model of all these things plug in, which is why I'm not surprised by the fact that sometimes if I think hard enough, the answer's there. Is that it's just a model of just like tweaking things. Nothing, as I said earlier, goes totally upside down and we totally change the concept. It tweaks things, it's a subtle tweak as to, do people need to, have a multivitamin or have, a vitamin D, or do they need to have, caffeine on the bike, or do they need to have no caffeine in the lead up to the race? All these things have got multiple kind of complexities, but at the end of the day, it's just trying to, I suppose, point people in the right direction and say, look, you've automatically got a better idea if you've tested things before. If you never test these things, particularly in race leader, it's all going to go pear-shaped. Yet you've done months of training that you did many things right, but you change it in the race week. And it's nice to kind of like cut through some of the fads and things like that. And if you want to do it again, more than happy to do it.
Absolutely, 100%. Maybe once the races are back on, and we'll get some more questions put out there, and
100%.
I think for midwinter, because I think the big mistake is the October, November, December period. I think that's when people kind of like, particularly without a season this year, sometimes with, what it's like for planning, they make huge, great plans in September, October, and then start really going for it instead of going, hey, we're just about to go into the lowest ebb of the year. Got to be really careful how much somebody trains, how much they think about, trying to get ahead of everybody when we're all going into winter. And I think that's a period of, again, there's complexities that each person's individual, but there's also some rock solid rules that when people realize it, I think, why would I do the biggest volume of long runs between October and December? My body's always getting injured. It's so cold. It feels miserable. I'll cut back. Bingo, less physio, feel better, stronger in the gym, and all they've done is thought, October to December isn't the best time to do long runs. So give that a thought. I'd be lovely to be coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna go get a curry now, Joe.
Yeah.
Nice ones. Cheers, Joe. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.